And then I guess the man would be waiting.
Mike, if you want that big comfy chair, I can sit over here.
No, I don't need a big comfy chair, I'm putting things out for you guys.
Oh, okay.
Is this for one of your,
No, this can be for you.
oh, okay, I'll run on that.
Do you want a minute taker here today?
It doesn't matter to me, I think you do, because it is a public meeting, you need to have at least basic minutes of commissioners in attendance,
Or we'll get it.
matters discussed, and a record of any action taken. As for what I'm here for, I understand it's just information, so it would be a discussion rather than an action meeting. And I can answer questions about what I'm proposing, explain why I'm proposing it, that it has no particular
In other words, kind of a guideline for us.
well, yeah, what it is this is a way, I'll describe the problem you have, and then this is a way to fix it. There are an infinite number of other solutions, I'm sure. This was the one that worked for me. I developed it by starting with the premise that whatever fix we came up with was not going to reduce anybody's salary. That they get at least the same amount they were getting now under the proposed solution. Because I thought that was way less disruptive and way less, it would be more salvageable. But, I mean, you could get the same place by reducing wages. And the nature of the problem here is that all of these wages are fixed.
Hey, Michelle, I'm gonna put you on speaker. This is Laura. Thanks. Are you still with us?
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe the best place to start is with a description of what I believe the problem is. I gave everybody a handout, I've got a few extras if other people want them. Copies of the statutes. And I'm gonna put this there. Okay. When we're ready, let me kind of start with a background of what I see the problem to be. Now, the sheriff's salary is fixed by statute. It needs to be established in accordance with statute, and that's the first listing here, 7-4-2503. And to summarize, what that provides is that you establish as a starting point for other salaries a uniform base salary for the treasurer, clerk and recorder, clerk of district court. JP is also covered by that as a minimum salary, and the sheriff. Now, in Broadwater County, for the preceding fiscal year, that salary was established at $38,334, I believe, basically $38,000 and change. By operation of law, to that for the sheriff's salary, you add $2,000 under 2B here, which would give for the sheriff a base salary of $40,334, $40,000 and change. In addition to that, the sheriff, like the deputy sheriffs, is entitled under 2C to longevity payment of 1% of the salary determined with law. for each year of service. That number should give what Brenda was receiving. What I discovered when I got into the actual numbers being used here is the sheriff's salary was set at 43 something. Tracking it down from some point before Brenda became sheriff, a mystery increment, an additional increment of about 3,100 was being added to the sheriff's salary. That number was being used as the base for computing the deputy sheriff's salaries, driven by a percentage. The next problem is that the compensation for deputy sheriffs and the undersheriff is a range for that compensation is established by statute. And that's 742508. Broadwater County happens to be a county with a population of under 15,000. That means the statutory range within which deputy sheriffs can be paid. The undersheriff is entitled to 95% of the sheriff's base. The deputies, by law, have to fall into that 85 to 90% range. There's a specific statute that says these compensation provisions prevail over any inconsistent compensation provisions in the law. That's set out as 742507. What I discovered when I looked at your collective bargaining agreement is that, first of all, the salary percentages, a number of them are set outside that range. Detention captain at 94%, patrol captain at 93%. I believe the patrol captain position is currently vacant. Sergeant at 92%, and the others were at least theoretically within a lawful range. So right there we have a problem. There was an additional problem created by the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. It had a so-called Me Too provision in it, which said if any other county employee receives a raise, the deputy sheriffs get that entire raise. Now, and there was an arbitration decision that awarded them a raise that was not given to the sheriff, which further put their salaries outside this salary range. And simply by operation of law, if the sheriff gets $1, the undersheriff, a $1 increase in her salary, the undersheriff can only receive 95 cents of that, and the deputy sheriffs will receive 90%, 89%, whatever the rank structure calls for. Now for the sheriff, the undersheriff, and all of the deputies, for each calendar year of service completed for the Broadwater County Sheriff's Office, they are by statute entitled to longevity, which is statutorily defined as 1% of their base salary for each year of service. So if you have 10 years, you get 10% added to your salary. There's an order for calculating these things and a method of calculation, but we always need to start the calculations with the sheriff's salary. So I had deputies being paid, the situation is we got deputies being paid in excess of the amount permitted by statute. We have probably have had here for 10 years. I was more interested in ascertaining what the situation was than digging up the historical whys. Because to fix it, I needed to know what is and why it was. but it looks like it's been probably about 10 years. We had that mystery increment in the sheriff's salary. So what I did was I started trying new base salaries for the sheriff and running an appropriate percentage, or 95 for the undersheriff, top end 90%. And I kept working that up until I had a base salary for the sheriff, 90% of which would provide basically equal wages for the highest paid person outside. The undersheriff fell in line pretty easily. But my purpose was to establish, for purposes of this solution, a minimum base salary for the sheriff that would let us then use the statutory percentages, or percentages within the statutory range, to calculate new salaries for the deputy sheriffs that were entirely lawful. Now, I did all of this without reference to the 56-cent general raise that has been budgeted. The results of that effort, computations, are set out in this document, which is my proposed solution. A couple of notes. The current numbers, all of the stuff on the current side, is driven off of the pay slips. I got the paycheck stubs for 10/1 of this year to 10/14 of this year, that particular pay period. And I looked to see what everybody was getting. I multiplied the hourly rate shown on the pay stub times 2080 and the longevity shown times 24. The longevity year numbers are what I was given. As an aside, longevity is based on calendar years of service. When someone, a deputy sheriff, undersheriff, or sheriff, completes a calendar year of service and hits their anniversary date, that is the point that the additional longevity kicks in. It's by specific Supreme Court decision affirmed by the Attorney General. That's simply the way the law is. And, we can, if those numbers need to be fiddled with, they need to be fiddled with anyhow. They don't affect the solution, because the solution is focused on the base. What I came up with was a minimum base for the sheriff of $48,000. That does not produce a significant increase for the sheriff. I had thought initially when I looked at this that because this is a consolidated sheriff coroner's office, that maybe that 3,100 increment was coroner's pay. It does not appear that that is the case, since the coroner pay is being paid separately. That's perfectly lawful, but it makes it pretty clear that 3,100 is not the coroner increment. So I've got to, in any event, I needed to move the base up because it's the base for the office of sheriff that drives the then the percentage range for deputies is driven off it. But the number I came up with was a base of $48,000 for the sheriff. Now, to lawfully get the base with that number for the sheriff under 742503, we have to increase the uniform base for all elected officials to $46,000. 46,000 plus the 2,000 statutory increment for the sheriff brings us to that 48,000 that I then use as the base for calculating the deputy sheriff's wages. As you can see, the results down through, basically through all of your senior deputies are fairly small. Corthell's winds up getting a little over 750, but I'm bumping up against it with Kostelecki at 186. I could have kept tuning this down until I had one of these numbers exactly 0, but I was getting really, really tired of doing math. And there's no particularly good way to do this in Excel because the numbers are all over the map. So then when we get down to 2 newer officers, and particularly Officer Wenzel, who's currently at the bottom of the salary range, you see some pretty significant increases under this. But the total dollars without any allowance for fringe benefits needed to fix the problem in the sheriff's office of considered wrongs only, it's a little under $11,000. However, because of the fact the elected officials' salaries are tied together by statute, I can't get to a lawful base for the sheriff that lets us accomplish this fix without increasing the base for all of the other elected officials. I'm sorry about that. And that's where the big numbers in this fix come in. I, again, was getting tired of calculating on a just ballpark, but I think I'm pretty close. Now, to this proposed fix, I've attached some notes that explain my thinking. I think we've pretty well been through the reason for the proposed changes. We simply have a mess that is unlawful and that needs to be fixed.
How did this originally happen, Mike? Do we know?
Well,
I'm thinking back in 2005 when the detention center was built, they brought in the rank structure.
That was 2004.
Well, that's when they
I have.
Well, no, this actually started in 2004. This whole mess started in 2004. And the thing is that you couldn't get people to apply here for $12 an hour. And so Rich and Ben and John Flynn had a discussion with the city and the county, and they said that they were going to use part of the city funds to fund an increase. And that's how it came apart. And they said through their, what they thought was a public safety commission back in the day, that their public safety agreement with the city was that they could allocate those funds from the city, and then they adjusted outside the scope of the state law. And that's where that 90 for a deputy and then the 94 came into play.
Yeah.
And
I think it was all
done in good intentions.
innocent and not, no evil intention. I think it was all done transparently. But calling an advisory committee a public safety commission doesn't make it a public safety commission. There are statutory requirements to get there. And if you have a public safety commission, it is way more than advisory. At that point, the Public Safety Commission has the authority to set salaries for all of the deputy sheriffs and the undersheriff. And they can set it without reference to the statutory range. So if you thought you had a Public Safety Commission, it's completely understandable that you went there. But, it kind of got stopped halfway. The formalities were not complied with. And the advisory commission never had the authority needed to adopt a rank structure and set salaries at the level. So what we have is a mess. I don't think it was evilly created. I think it was created out of necessity and by, in good faith. And I think it was all done openly and above board. But we now know we have a problem and we need to address it. The easy fix would have been to create a public safety commission and have them approve this or some other pay schedule, and life would have gone forward. All of us happy. For whatever reason, that didn't happen, and I can understand the city of Townsend or town of Townsend not wanting to become more deeply enmeshed with all of the issues associated with law enforcement. So I've explained the rationale for the methodology chosen, which was I wanted to protect existing salaries and let you go forward from there. If you choose this or some similar methodology to fix the problem, the actions that are going to be required are we're going to have to increase that uniform base established under 42502 to 46,000. That gets us to the uniform base for the sheriff, a lawful base for the sheriff of 48,000. 46 plus the 2,000 statutory increment for the sheriff. To do that, then you have to find funds in your budget. I would suggest that a chunk of the funds may be available in your existing coroner's budget, but all of this is a matter that you need to discuss and work out with the sheriff in consideration of all of the things you've got.
Mike, I have a question for you. You utilized the sheriff and my coroner stipend in your calculation, and I'm curious to know why
Okay.
not in Captain Corfell's. Because he's a coroner, and he gets the same
Well-
stipend that I do.
Actually, I did not, of all of the pay slips I got, I did not get pay slip for Cortez. When I was doing this, I called up and I said, I need to know what his base salary is. You know, what are you paying him per hour? And I got an hourly payment. What are you paying him for longevity? I got that. I was not aware that he was already a coroner, and I think that we could probably, that can be addressed within this framework. And I'll
So-
touch on it.
Is the proposal then to take away the stipends for coroner? Is that, is that what your intention is?
No, well, we can fix the problem, and I need to look now in Corthel's, in the coroner's stipend, to see what implications that has. But as we go on through the notes to this, I can fix the problem without the coroner's stipend. And this fixes it, just saying, to the hell with that, it's an undue complication. Because we're increasing the base enough that we swallow that coroner's stipend and base increase. But my recommendation is not necessarily to do that entirely. We go on, let me go through the actions. Under sub 4 by the county, if you get into my notes, actions necessary to implement proposal. What I say suggest is looking at whatever resolution you have that consolidates the coroner's office and sheriff's office. And the statute on consolidation of offices says the commissioners shall at the time salaries are fixed, provide a salary for the consolidated office. Such salary shall not be more than 20% higher than the highest salary fixed for the two consolidated offices. And I suggested adding, even though we pick it up in the base, recognizing coroner with some number, and I suggested making it a number that's certain, because then, just for administrative purposes, we know how much the coroner's stipend is going to be. It's less than you're getting now. Brenda's getting right at 4,000, 3,992 or some such. I covered that with the increase in the base. Brenda's base salary, and by putting it in the base, it counts toward longevity, which is a nice little bonus, or it's an additional benefit sort of feature. I do think, however, that probably it would be best, and I suggested, but I don't require it, because this was getting to be a pretty spendy fix already when everything was taken into account, to do that some sort of number really doesn't matter to me. It could be anything up to 9,600, which would be 20% of Brenda's base. I don't recommend that, but it's possible. So anyhow, that's a side issue, not necessary to the solution of the otherwise unlawful salaries. We need to have union agreement on this because of the language in the collective bargaining agreement. As some of you know, we have had some preliminary discussions with the union to outline to them what we see the problem being, and to suggest where we were going with the proposed fix. These discussions were really in the context of the pending grievance by Sergeant Buck, who was suggesting he should be paid more for being a sergeant than he is. The punchline on that is, if we have to defend that grievance to the end, one of our defenses will be that his wages are already in excess of statute, that the wage he's receiving is void as a matter of law, that right now the most anybody could be getting as a deputy sheriff is 90% of 4334. And we've told the union that if the arbitrator ignores this principle of law, we will take it to district court. I at least view that as the nuclear option, likely to produce massive upheaval, adversely affecting the public safety function, and simply looking fundamentally unfair to all of the deputies, to be honest. So, and we suggested that we were going to look at another solution that protected salaries, and we put the grievance in kind of suspension. It's pending, but nobody's taking any action to move it forward. This solution would make this go away. Now, one of the things I did in calculating this solution was I created my own rank structure. And that's set out on page 4, notes of the handout. The undersheriff, of course, gets 95%, that's fixed by statute. I put the captain at 90%, sergeant at 88%. I created my own special category of senior deputy, somebody with,
We have it listed at 8 years.
what,
Our senior deputy status is at 8 years.
8 years?
There's no pay increase for it, but they do.
Right. But I thought we could even tie a little 1% pay bump to becoming a senior deputy. But to do that, I put it at the 5 years because I had a problem with Kostelecki. And you can see my fix for him is pretty thin without the 87%. Clearly, I mean, we could, you can do, this is again plain. That's the reason I selected the number, and that's the reason I selected the 5 years. Is it works to pull, and I thought 5 years was a nice incentive number. But that again is something you can play with, it's just a matter of making the numbers come out right for everybody over here. I did 5 years because Kostelecki had 5 years. By the time we get this implemented, he'll probably have 6, so we could,
Well, he's actually got 8 years.
does he?
Yeah, he hit 8 years, 12.5. And I actually have 15,
Okay.
as of 12.4. And so the pay freezes in past years is where the longevity years come in.
Well, for longevity, I can't count pay freeze years. Longevity, like the wages, is driven by statute, and you can't count for longevity in a year in which wages were frozen, so.
Well, I guess that's, because when I'm looking at this, the total number looks great. And I brought it up with the chairman yesterday, is you start throwing that longevity and making that total number, that looks great, but if the sheriff died today, if you're basing anything off of longevity, and you put somebody with zero years here, because longevity creates from the agency you're hired with, not how much years you have in law enforcement.
Right.
So if that's a 0, then if you've got anything to do with longevity in your calculation, you just
No.
screwed it up.
The sheriff's longevity,
Doesn't count.
if you look at,
That's what I'm saying, is that the total number has that longevity increase in it.
well,
The base is
the
1%.
total number has the longevity increase in it. But if Brenda gets a better offer from the FBI and leaves tomorrow, the new sheriff would, let's assume it's no promotion from within, but they do a national search and hire somebody from Cincinnati to be sheriff.
No, it's not a promotion here, I will tell you.
What?
It's a demotion.
Yeah, well,
I've worked my way through every rank here, and I make less money now as undersheriff than I did when I was a detective.
right.
So, I've got a lot of heartburn, Mike, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, and a lot of these conversations have taken place before.
Yeah, the problem I've got is,
So, I'm just sorry, I'm just trying to follow before we
Okay.
go off. Just to finish that thought though, her longevity doesn't have anything to do with the
no,
calculations.
it has nothing to do with.
So if she had 0
calculation.
experience, people would still
The
get
new
that.
person would come in, they'd be making less than you, less, probably than a lot of people with 0 longevity with Broadwater County. The problem you've got, the reason you make less as undersheriff than you made as a detective is inherent in the statutory pay matrix. As undersheriff, you become management and are a salaried employee.
I get overtime.
Well, if you get overtime, then, you know, let me put it this way, they are not obligated to pay you overtime. They may pay you overtime as a matter of policy because of the way this is so compressed. But, and the same is true of the captain, it's only when we hit the sergeant that overtime is mandatory under the Fair Labor Standards Act. But many agencies do in fact allow overtime compensation for otherwise exempt employees, so it's not a,
Can I ask you, is that based on the class of county though? Because I know it is in class 1 counties, in class 1 counties, they are required to be a exempt
If-
employee.
if you're a small agency with, I believe, under 5, I need to double check this, but I believe it's under 5, you're exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. It doesn't have any relevance here, but if you're in Powder River County where they have a 3-person department, it's a big deal. And the Fair Labor Standards Act does not require overtime there. It's irrelevant here because you're over the 5 officer maximum for being exempt. It was designed, I think, for typically smaller, really small counties and even more so small towns and cities that might have a police chief and a patrol officer, that sort of thing. But once you pass that 5-officer threshold, you're under the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act, however, establishes minimums. It does not establish maximums in any sense of the word, which means that you can, for example, pay overtime even though you are not required to do so. I think some of the smaller departments work on a pretty flexible schedule. Garfield County is one.
That's really flexible because the sheriff and the undersheriff are both at the academy right now,
Yeah,
so I'm not sure who's running that county.
that's a recurring problem. Basically, it's being provided, I wasn't aware, but it's happened in the past, it's being provided under a cooperative agreement by adjoining law enforcement agencies. And we certainly hope they both graduate.
Well, the one's in quarter basic, the undersheriff's in my quarter basic class, and the sheriff is doing the first class there, so, I asked him yesterday.
Anyway, I had, solved that crisis first time 6 or 7 years ago. I think they're getting pretty used to it, partly because their base is so low that job driving truck for the local rancher pays better, and with the Balkans swan song so close, awful lot of people are, I can't move on, but
Let me
that,
ask you this, Mike,
Yeah.
I'm gonna shoot you straight. Is basically what you're saying is there's no real benefit in Broadwater County to take it, to work your way through the ranks, to take a promotion. Because in all reality, in the end of this, I could lose my ability to have overtime, and I could lose the ability to have my coroner stipend, and I could just get stuck at 95% of the sheriff's salary, and be required to work all the time. So it made more sense for me to resign my position as undersheriff and go back to being a deputy to where I could actually survive.
if that situation were to arise, the law does allow you to essentially no longer be under sheriff and move back to being a deputy sheriff, whatever your former rank was.
Well, I was captain, which still does me no good. So, I mean, I guess that's the point where my heartburn is here, Mike. I'm not trying to cause a fight, but, it's, I understand. Unfortunately, I can tell you right here, I can tell you right now that I sat in this room almost 4 years ago when this came up the first time, and said, don't do it. 2 years ago, when this award was given out, I said, it's not a $40,000 fix, it's a $100,000 fix, and no one listened to me then. So now, I'm sitting here going, okay, now we're gonna have, I could lose everything that I have right now, which really serves no point in me to do the job that I do anymore.
That, you know,
Aren't you going up by $380?
yeah, no, let's
Well-
keep it to the broad outlines here.
Well, I mean, I guess, like, I understand Wynn's heartburn, but everybody has heartburn about work, and
Yeah,
we're
but-
here to talk about how to solve this larger problem, and
But let me say, I mean, a lot of this is the result of the operation of the statutory wage range. At the Council of Elected Officials, which is sheriffs, everybody, we talked about a couple of things. One was coming up with some better way to fix compensation for electeds than the current county compensation board. Nobody could really come up with anything on that did not have more warts than the current system, so that was dropped. We also had a discussion based on your very concerns about decoupling the deputy sheriffs and under sheriffs from the sheriff's salaries. That was overwhelmingly opposed by the Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Their reasons are their own. I don't pass on whether they're good or bad. But the decision was, if the sheriffs and peace officers are opposed to the decoupling of deputy sheriff's salaries, we, meaning MACO, the county commissioners as a group, are not going to burn our powder trying to push it through. You have the problem here that you run people through the academy, and they can look west to Lewis and Clark County. We can look east to Gallatin County, just to pick the two closest examples. And once they've finished basic, they're a really marketable commodity. They can get a 10, 20% or better increase by making the jump. Beaverhead County complains that all they do is hire trained deputies from Madison County. Madison County says all we're doing is getting them ready to go to Gallatin County. It's a problem statewide. The fix would be to change the law, for the legislature to decouple deputies' salaries and perhaps sheriff's salaries, so that we, meaning counties, could meet the local conditions. We could adjust salaries to be competitive to concern. I mean, you look at this 5% statutory range for deputy sheriffs in Broadwater County, and the statutory provision that says the sheriff shall establish a rank structure within those limits, shall fix the count based upon a percentage according to the following schedule, 85 to 90. But boy, there's not much room for growth or getting better in a 5% range. And you take the fact that because you are a smaller county, your base salary that we're working with to do that range is also lower than, say, Gallatin or Lewis and Clark. We have a real mill of a Hess, but I'm stuck with the law. And when I say that, I don't say that to minimize your concerns. Even in big departments, I was in Missoula County for 30-some years, and I had officers decline or not apply for promotion all the time, and I'd chit-chat with them, or they'd volunteer over a beer that no point in becoming a lieutenant and making more as a sergeant. And you say, well, makes sense to me, but I'd sure like to see you in charge.
Well, and let me ask you this 378 that you have there, is that over a year? Because that's
That-
18 cents.
Okay, that's meaningless. We still have out there pending, and this is without considering the general increase that we've had on hold where we looked at getting a solution to this. We absolutely have to fix the union contract before we implement that raise. Because if we give a general county increase of 56 cents an hour to the electeds and to everybody outside the deputy bargaining unit, if that Me Too clause is there, it seems to clearly require 56 cents an hour to all of the deputies. That plays hob with a percentage-based rank structure, and it digs the hole we're in even deeper because it pushes a deputy at 90%. If Brenda gets 56 cents, under the law, that deputy can only get 90% of that 56 cents. Now, I talk about what to do about that increase. A little further on, and it's on page 5 of my notes. Indicate I made these all prior to any implementation of that wage increase. My recommendation, and there are two ways to do this. I mean, give the electeds all 56 cents, which means the deputies would get percentages of that just by operation of the new salary matrix. The other alternative is to not give the electeds 56 cents an hour because they're already getting a nice bump from this. But, as you'll see, my conclusion was that since raises for the higher ranks in the sheriff's office are nominal under the proposal, my recommendation is to grant the raises to the elected. So, in addition to that increase, shown on as proposed, there would be for you 95% of 56 cents. For Captain Corthels, there would be 90% of 56 cents. In addition to that, also for Captain Corthels, assuming my suggested some additional coroner increment, if he's a coroner, that would apply to him as well. I had originally thought I was going to have to use coroner's increment to balance the books, but the place where I got the tightest on balancing the books was way down the rank structure where there wasn't a coroner, so I didn't use the coroner increment. I may have needed to have done so to cover if Captain Corthels is in fact getting an increment. I wasn't aware of that.
And that was part of my question was, well, how is this corner going to come into play here? Because we have 6 people who just flat refuse to do it.
Okay.
And so we're like, we keep the dead bodies. And, which is, I understand, there's a reason why I teach a class. It's not for everybody.
Okay.
So,
Where would it come into play? It would be, assuming a decision is made to grant a coroner's increment of some number, that some number would be added to the numbers that we have. Well, for example, let's just say, and I plucked the number kind of out of the air, but on your salary, let's say coroner's increment is $1,800. I mean, that's a discussion that needs to be had, and what's the value, and what's that worth. And commissioners need to take action on it. But let's say it's $1,800. Then your increase under this proposal with corners increment would be 2178 or something like that. Brenda's increase would be 2528. And that's before we do anything with that 56 cents. I see Captain Corthos is here. I got bad, inadequate information. Some of it's probably a result of my not asking enough questions. But for whatever reason, I didn't get a copy of your pay slip with all of the other pay slips. I called, I was at a point where I thought I knew what I needed to know. I asked the person who was in Debbie's absence, I said, for Nick, I need the hourly rate. She gave it to me. For Nick, I need the longevity amount on a particular paycheck. She gave it to me. I calculated everything regarding your current base without adding anything in for the coroner's increment. And then I created my own magic rank structure. And started testing things against it. Yours fit, it probably would not have if it had that coroner's pay in it. We could probably make you well with an additional coroner's increment, but that's something we need to talk about. This was not aimed at
Oh, no.
taking you out of the.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Going back to the union contract, pretty much the Me Too clause, I guess I need clarification
Okay.
in that.
The only place we need to take the Me Too clause out of the contract is as it relates to deputy sheriffs.
I was gonna say, because if the Me Too clause is in there, and please correct me if I'm wrong, then we just continue to get the mess that we're currently in, right?
Right, that for deputy sheriffs. It's a matter to be discussed at the
Later.
table with the Teamsters as to whether or not the Me Too clause continues for the detention officers. I mean, I can see a situation over time where we get a really anomalous result, but that's, we can basically,
Because we'll be coming up to negotiations here shortly, so.
Yeah, but I've got my proposed contract language, and did you get a copy of?
I do, sir, thank you.
You got that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my proposed language is to simply apply to deputy sheriffs, and I think
Okay.
I've been clear that I was getting real tired of this project by the time I got to doing my notes. But that language is just regarding compensation for deputy sheriffs. We can leave the Me Too language in there for detention officers. Probably should, because at least we don't need to play with it to fix this problem. It could be the subject of negotiation in the next round of
Okay.
bargaining on compensation. Compensation's always open at the table. But for deputy sheriffs, it has to be open within the range set by statute.
Right.
Which, I don't know whether you were here, I mean, the question of decoupling deputy salaries from the sheriff and potentially decoupling the sheriff from the other electeds are issues upon which there is no consensus, to say the least. And I pitched it at the Council of Elected Officials, and to their credit, the sheriffs and peace officers agreed to think about it. When we reconvened, they thought it was a really lousy idea.
Well, and we've had a lot of discussions about
Yeah.
that, Mike. I sit on the board for
Yeah.
MSPOA, and we've had a lot of discussions about it. It's almost a regular meeting discussion,
Yeah,
and there's lots of concerns why. And
well,
And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I have been, all these guys have heard me gripe, okay? And I don't gripe very often, and I get it out of off my chest, and then I go about my business. But for the better part of 3 years now, I make less an hour than my deputies that I supervise. And that's what I think a lot of the sheriffs in the state are going, we don't wanna deal with this nightmare.
Yeah.
And that's where it's coming down to.
And I really think as part of the decoupling or eliminating that statutory range for deputy sheriffs, to make it effective without creating deputies that on a straight-time basis are paid more than the sheriff, we need to decouple the sheriff's salary from the other electeds. And that's not unheard of. The county attorneys are not, or full-time county attorneys are not tied to the elected range. Their salaries are set separately. Subject to the limitation, they can't be higher than the district judges. Although I'll tell you a funny little story. The base salary can be set there, but if you add the county attorney longevity, which is a 5-year deal, to it, they can in fact make that little bit more than the district court judges. I had 2 classmates, one a district judge and one a county attorney. And just as soon as he got his salary up to the point he was making more, he went up and put the knife in the ribs of the judge. I mean, they're still.
And I can understand, especially in the metropolitan areas, such as Billings, Great Falls, Missoula County, when you do have the sheriff attached to all the elected officials, that becomes a huge pay cost. That's not a small pay cost, it's a pretty significant amount, especially in Yellowstone County, But when you start talking, there's only 7 large counties in the state, and, the other 8 of us are small, and most of us are class 1 or class 6 counties. So, that's where.
And I recognize it's a problem. I mean, I was the sheriff in Powder River County, and I think neither me nor my deputies is ever gonna see another dime if we're not tagged on to the rest of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the other hand, my argument is, being a deputy in Powder River County is every bit as dangerous, every bit as demanding, probably more so, than being a deputy in Missoula County, because it's, you alone, you're dealing with the same situations, and I mean, it's domestics, it's transients, it's people.
And you do it without backup.
Yeah, you're out there hoping the highway patrolman's someplace around, because if he isn't, you're it. And I mean, so why should we pay the guy in Missoula 50% more than we pay the guy in Powder River County? The answer is that's the way it is, and trying to change it opens up more things. I think it would be a fruitful source of examination, but one of the things I proposed was for the whole elected was kind of a state commission to establish salary ranges based on duties, training, degree of difficulty, if you will, to recommend to counties as a guideline. It was going to be non-binding, but it would have broken the tie between the clerk of court, who does extremely valuable indoor work 8 to 5, and sheriff, who does extremely valuable outdoor work at some significant risk to life and limb for only $1 an hour more. I mean, is that fair? I mean, you can go off in that issue forever, but it was just it was a thought. It had problems, and nobody else thought it was a really good idea. So But it's something I think we, meaning Mako, sheriffs and peace officers, and probably the other elected officials all need to take a really good look at over time. They're, you know, fixing from the top used to be that all of the wages were set based on Classic County, and that was that. That didn't work. The Compensation Commission is way ahead of that methodology, but it still has its flaws, and one of them is the fact that everything's tied together. You can't make significant changes. And I didn't mean to pick on the clerk of courts as an example, but it's, you know, it's just, you know, what's comparable and what's justifiable. The $2,000 increment's been fixed for 10 years. Maybe it should be bigger. I don't know, but I do know every time you touch some part of this in the legislature, you have other people. Started out, it was the sheriff, now it's the treasurer, a little something for being elections administrator. And so it goes. I think the clerk of court and JP are the only ones that are really stuck at the uniform base. And like I said, it's a challenge, and not something we can solve here. I mean, what I'm working at is getting the weeds out of this garden without hurting anybody too badly in the process. Without hurting anybody at all, but it still doesn't produce a fair or just compensation system. In my judgment, I mean. But that's where I came from on this. My base, the sole basis of my calculations was to come up with a base, let Brenda establish a rank structure within that itty-bitty range that protected everybody's current wages and gave us a place to start to go forward. It was lawful. And it's going to be subject, it's actually going to open the gap a little bit between you and you and Nick or you and Buck people. It's not going to be perfect. The percentage, we're going to be working from a higher base, and the percentage difference is going to be a little.
Yeah, because when I took from captain to undersheriff, it was 17 cents. I said, ooh, got a whole ball of new headaches, and I got 17
Yeah,
cents.
well, let's see. Every 2 weeks you could buy a 6-pack of really good beer.
Yeah.
Or every 2 weeks you might be able, if there was a special, to get an 18-pack of
Yeah.
Cheap beer.
something pretty skunky.
Yeah. Thank God for Schmidt.
Well, I decided I could drink less. But,
I
you know,
had to save for a year to buy a bottle of Crown, but that's all right.
I just did the
a
math,
small bottle.
and, not that I'm a mathematician, but if we left it like it is, Nick would actually be losing roughly about $800.
Okay, see, that then means we have to look at,
If,
Doing-
with the $1,800.
doing a coroner's increment to make that number match. And my recommendation is that you do something like that. I would also tell you that you can, I mean, wherever you set the coroner's increment this year is something that you can examine each year going forward. And when you set salaries, adjust it up or down. But that's, yeah, I mean, like I said, I calculated mix without the coroner increment in it, and that was my bad. I didn't chase down I didn't ask for enough information when I called.
And we also have another deputy coroner, Andy Martin, who's not on this list.
He's a part-time deputy, and as far as I'm concerned, we can fix that either by adjusting his hourly rate, because it doesn't implicate this, or by the coroner's. However, the part-time people are outside the bargaining unit,
No,
No,
they're
they're
bargaining.
using
Are they?
theirs, yeah.
Yeah. They pay dues.
no, you can,
But he's a part-time relief, so he's just
yeah,
on
it's-
an on-need basis versus,
it's-
well, he is scheduled for certain times, but
yeah,
he's
it's-
not.
That's an easy fix. And
Yeah.
Once we do the other adjustments, we can fix his without great cost. And if he is a coroner and we're doing a coroner's increment, then we prorate that, or just give it to him to keep him interested in staying certified and being available. Those are business and management decisions that are really outside my purview. Hell, you can pay him $30 an hour, and if he doesn't work too many hours, he's still within the salary range. I mean, and I'm not sure how that gets addressed. I was looking at just the rates, and I'm sure you have him assigned as a regular deputy, so he'd get the percentage kick up, and then if he's a coroner.
Mike, it's Michelle.
Yeah,
Can you do a clarification for me on the longevity stuff?
okay.
I know longevity is based on the statute and it's 1% per year of service, right? Of the base. But if the elected officials 1 year don't get a raise,
Right.
so say we take somebody who has 5 years of service and in the 5th year, the elected officials don't get a raise. So then the deputy wouldn't get longevity for that year, correct?
That would be true.
Okay, so what happens in year 6 when the elected officials get a raise? Does
Uh,
the deputy then have
That,
6 years of longevity or 5 years of
they
longevity?
would have 5 years of longevity. Years in which salaries are frozen, let me read the statute. Years in which wages are frozen are not counted for longevity statute. The 7/4/2510, entitled to longevity for each year of service with the office. But years of service during any year in which the salary was set at the same level as the salary of a prior fiscal year may not be included in any calculations of longevity increases. There have been situations in a number of larger counties at least, where to avoid the effect of that statute, the elected officials were given a 1 cent or $1 raise. Thus, the
To avoid
salary,
this.
the salaries were not set at the same level, and the longevity could be awarded to the deputy sheriffs across the board. But if they absolutely freeze the wages, then that year does not count for longevity.
Okay, so does anybody there know what years Broadwater County did not give the elected officials a raise?
Yeah, they do, and the longevity numbers I was using indicated, and I can't remember which documentation I got that from, indicated a start date and then wages frozen for fiscal 208, I think. I can't remember which
Maybe it
year.
was 209.
209.
It was 10/11.
I know, yeah, it was one
It was
of
10/11.
10/11. And so that year was not included in the longevity calculations.
So it's just 211.
Right.
So when everybody's
So-
looking at these numbers and they look at the longevity calculations, anybody who was hired prior to 2011 actually has 1 year of longevity less than their actual total years of service.
That would be correct.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, years where salaries are frozen do not count for longevity. That's really a double whammy for deputy sheriffs. Not only do they not see a raise, but they don't get their longevity. That language is actually carryover from an earlier statutory scheme, I believe. Like, it's getting to be a lot of years since the compensation boards went into place, and my memory's not what it once was, but
Okay.
does anybody have any questions? I mean, this is gonna be an action item for the commissioners. I think the action you should take is to commit to any fix along the lines I've suggested, contingent upon obtaining union agreement to appropriate contract language along the lines of what I have suggested regarding compensation in the current year's collective bargaining agreement. Brenda is going to have to take a look at the rank structure I propose. There's no particular magic in it other than it made the math work to see if that's something that she's comfortable with in her department. You guys are going to have a discussion about the coroner's increment that I suggested you do. And you need, I'm going to be gone. 3 days from now, I'll be out for a month. So, decide what you want to do with the coroner's increment. Something needs to be done to protect Cortho's salary, because I did not consider the increment when I came up with the answer that said he'd be just fine under this scheme. With the coroner's increment, it turns out he won't be. So there needs to be a coroner's increment, or we need to come up with an even higher base to make this work.
Do you need a copy of a time? Because I have it.
I
We
could,
just did I just roughly did the
Okay.
math.
I could get one, but
Okay.
we need to cover that, because that was a mistake on my part.
I just added it to your last base and this base that he had here.
I didn't have the information, and when I asked for information, I personally did not ask the person I was talking to for all of the information I would have needed to do it correctly. But I'm happy with that, because we can fix it.
Right.
I added your corner from last year and what they were, the 1,800, what they were offering this year to the base this year. And there was a right at $800 difference less.
So we can play with that, but to be honest, you guys probably need to do the calculations. I'm finishing up. I'm going to be gone for a month. After the first of the year, I will no longer be a regular employee of NACO. I'm going to go to a part-time status and help with the transition as a new person takes over my duties. And what I've told my wife is I'll be all done with that transition by the 1st of April. I suspect it may run a little past that, but I'm definitely going to be part-time at that point.
And you're going inactive, so you won't be tempted, right?
Yep, that's my thought. I can put my My plan is currently to put my bar license on retired status. And, so when somebody asks me a legal question, I can say, oh God, I can't lawfully tell you.
I'm sorry if you covered this, I had to go let a repairman into my house, but, the other issue that will have to be addressed by the commission and then also in a reworking of the CBA is with regard to any raises that are ever put forth in the county, right? Because
Right.
you won't be able to give 56 cents to everyone across the board.
Right, and I put some language in here about how to calculate deputy sheriff's salaries. And the secret for the future is that we need to have appropriate language in the collective bargaining agreement. But for deputies, the secret is that you give a raise to the sheriff. From that raise, we calculate using the appropriate percentages, base salaries for the undersheriff and for each deputy. Then we calculate the longevity that the undersheriff, deputy sheriffs are entitled to based on that new base rate. That combined base plus longevity becomes their true hourly rate for purposes of calculating overtime, giving them a paycheck. You don't want to try to do a shortcut of saying, well, we gave everybody 56 cents. If you do that, you are immediately distorting the rank structure and you are immediately putting the top end people at least out of the salary range. So that I'm not saying it's a good system, I'm saying it's the system imposed on us by the law. If you give 10% wage increase, you're gonna get yourself screwed up if you then try to increase the undersheriff by 95%. Calculate the new sheriff's base and then apply the appropriate rank percentages to that new base. That'll give you the salary for each rank, the base salary. Then you do your longevity calculations based on that individual's years of service with the Broadwater County Sheriff's Office when wages were not frozen. Let's say then use that to come to your total salary. It isn't any harder to do it this way, but it's a whole hell of a lot cleaner. It gets you to the right number, and if somebody says, why are you paying Win this, you can say, because this is the sheriff's salary, this is 95% of that, these are his years of service, this is his longevity, this is the total. And in his case, you could say, and then in addition to that, he receives the coroner's increment of. And we divide that by 2080, and that gives us an hourly rate at which we pay one. That's the way it needs to be done going forward. I think over time this was done various ways by various people, and there are some little discrepancies. Anderson and Peterson, by my way of thinking, should be exactly equal.
Well, Peterson's gone now, so,
Well, okay, but they should have been exactly equal.
yeah.
And there's about $150 a year discrepancy between the two salaries. Now, I don't know how it happened, why it happened. I suspect it was a matter of doing ad hoc calculations, not starting with first principles and working your way down the food chain. But that's, and I actually got the same numbers for Buck and Harris because they were at different percentages. Should have been at different percentages, but their actual wages were the same. I think that can be attributed to some implementation of the arbitration decision. Again, I don't know, I don't care.
Right.
It shouldn't have been that way, but it was, and now it will be fixed.
Hey, Mike, can I ask a question on the process?
Yeah,
On what our steps are moving forward? I understand we need to commit to this fix. We have a meeting coming,
you need to commit to a fix. The current
sure,
situation, mine is a suggestion. It's easy, it works. Whether it has warts are probably for people more intimately involved than I am to look at, but let's assume for purposes, to go forward with a fix.
thanks.
Steps.
Okay, so that's on the agenda for this coming Monday.
Right.
So we've got, of course, some homework to do before then. Then we need to wait on the union to get union buy-in from their members, propose language, go through that back and forth, and then we need to have a resolution to amend the budget. Is that Is that correct?
That basically is it. I would take action on the fix contingent upon obtaining agreement to the contract language from the union. If I was the union, and I think Aaron and Sean Fontaine, the two Teamsters representatives, understand the approach I took, I was proposing to take. I think they are generally in agreement with it. I think they realize that simply as a matter of law, the Me Too clause cannot continue as part of the deputy's compensation language. Like I say, I'm 100% sure, or I would commit them to taking that position at the bargaining table, but we sit down but if I were the union, I would agree to those changes only contingent upon the changes becoming effective the first pay period where the sheriff's base allows us to implement this change lawfully. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here, and I would like to see this happen sooner rather than later. Some of the delay has been me finding time to do the calculations, so for that we're late because I wasn't as fast as I might have been. But I think probably you're looking at making, I would recommend you make these changes retroactive for the whole fiscal year for everybody, not effective halfway through. If you make the changes in the salaries, we need to look at and compute and make sure everybody's getting the longevity they're entitled to. The longevity numbers are really not part of this fix. The real fix is to the base. And I may have erred in what I counted as longevity. I may have not calculated correctly, and that may require some adjustment, but I would say first the base wages, then we compute longevity based on that, gets a new pay rate for everybody. Whatever you do with the coroner's increment gets added on, and that gets blended into the pay rate for the people that are getting it. We go forward. Because the coroner's increment issue is solely people outside the bargaining unit or outside the union's concern, they indicated to me that they didn't care about anybody above Sergeant Buck in this context, because the others were all quote unquote management. Yep, which was, you know, fine with me, but my solution had to be more global than that, so. But what it does mean is you're free to have the discussions about the coroner's increment, sans the union, in my judgment.
Okay, thanks.
And I guess the only thing I would add as far as the time frame for implementation is we're up against January 16th is our court date with the district judge, and if we can't come up with an agreement that everybody agrees to, he'll certainly find one that everybody will
Well,
tolerate.
Well, see, and I mean, and his will be aimed at budget process and probably sending it back for reconsideration, but from my limited understanding, I think if we can come to agreement on this issue, it's likely there'll be possibility of resolution on that as well, so. Like I say, this is just my suggestion based on reading of the law. I've given you my math, my policy thoughts. It has absolutely no legal, no more legal force than anybody else's interpretation of the law, and comes with no guarantee that the Teamsters will buy off on it. I think they will, but when we met with them, we said, this is what we're looking at, we're not promising the money will be there, or it'll be approved, but do you think it would work? And I said, well, speaking generally and hypothetically, subject to seeing some details, but we understand the approach, we understand the reasons for it, and we will give it serious consideration. But they weren't going to buy it because we weren't actually selling it at that time. Can't sell it until the three of you and Brenda make some decisions. But if those decisions are made, I think the union will find it acceptable. Because the union does understand the nature of the problem we've got, and they understand that we can't go on like this.
And not to, in regards to the union, since we are coming up on negotiations here in a few months,
Yeah.
would you recommend that we kind of divide that contract? I think there's some core aspects of that bargaining agreement that apply, that are applicable to both sides of the fence, deputies and non-sworn. But I think it would be smarter than to maybe divide that into two schedules, as A and B for non-sworn and sworn.
I think it would be. I think it would make it a lot clearer what applies where. The thing is, this particular bargaining unit is a really, really old. It appears to have been modified by agreement over the years, but the unit determination language is odd. You've added the much larger detention center and detention staff, distinguishing between detention staff and deputies. Dispatchers were always part of it, so, yeah, but I think it would be
Especially if we're gonna start dividing out the Me Too laws, I think that's.
Yeah. I
Part
mean,
of the waters, I guess, in a sense.
I think probably having certainly separate schedules for compensation determination for sworn and the unsworn. See, for the unsworn, you can actually commit a 3-year contract to 20 cents an hour, whatever, each year for raises. And be bound by and go forward with that. For the deputy sheriffs, because of the statutory limit, you can't commit to anything but the percentage of the sheriff each year, future years in the contract. Now, I would,
Can in the contract, we just refer to the statute?
I would, but I would refer to the statute, but you also have to set a rank structure. And the precise percentages assigned to each rank and what it takes to move from one rank to another are subjects of bargaining as long as you keep them within the statutory range. For example, I said sergeants at 88%. They could come in and say, oh my God, we think he needs 89%. You could lawfully agree to that. I don't think it's a good idea, but it ain't my department, and I'll leave it to you guys to work out what's appropriate. You can't however say we think the sergeant deserves 88% plus 2,000 a year for being sergeant. Maybe if you require him to wear really fancy clothes, you could agree to a larger clothing allowance or something. But
We do not require that.
I mean, all of this is tied to base wages. There are other things that affect compensation that are, in fact, mandatory subjects of bargaining, which means you have to talk about it. You still can, in my judgment, should say no. But for example, you could agree that everybody gets their birthday off with pay. I mean, that's a nice little perk, but it's a cost. It means you don't have a body there. You lose X number of person days. Doesn't increase the base compensation, so it's not prohibitive, but it's a really, in my judgment, really stupid thing to agree to. But the union will ask, and you need to hem and haw and say, no, we're already short-staffed. Losing 5 more days of coverage is just not something we can deal with. Have a nice day. The range of things that can be proposed at the bargaining table is infinite. There are some limits as to what you can agree to. And we just need to make sure we don't agree to anything that's outside those limits, and we need to make sure we don't agree to anything that has a significant adverse operating impact on the operation of the sheriff's department. A general recommendation for that is that you're not big enough to have an in-house negotiator, but that you basically just send a negotiator to the table. But I always like to have an operational committee sitting in the back room that I could come talk to, and I could say, this is what they're proposing. These are what I see, what do you see? Because the operational impacts, or financial impacts, which are pretty easy to calculate, if you're talking wages or buying $100,000 in life insurance or whatever. And then there are operational impacts which really require detailed knowledge of how the place actually works. I go meet with them. The advantage was you weren't putting the immediate supervisor in a position of sitting at the table saying no to the people you supervise. And I had a problem. I had a health officer insisted that with his employees he should sit at the table, he'd argue with in front of the union. This is not a good thing. But, however you guys decide to work it, it's just a thought. But I mean, when I say available, I mean basically sitting in an office a few steps away, so that you'd say, I need to think about this and maybe make it, make some contact, recess some negotiations, step right out and say, okay, this is what's being proposed. In a small department, it might be for deputies, sheriff, undersheriff, and Nick, because the detention officers are